What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Stormgate video here on ExpeditionRTS. Today I wanted to talk about the most recent early access update patch, in which there was a few balance changes made. I gave myself a few days to think about it, even test some of the stuff. I was also working on other videos in the meantime, but really wanted to take a minute and give you some good analysis. But let me know. Maybe if that's less important, then I can do something more similar to what I did for the previous patch, which was to just give you my unbridled, unrefined first impressions off of reading it. So, if you have an opinion on that, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I'm going to get right into this. They changed the creep camps again a little bit. It was a minor reduction in the value of them. I'm not surprised to see this. You saw a lot in the recent tournament that some people were staying on one base and just using creep camps to sustain themselves. And I think that this is probably for the better. I will say that it's somewhat preferential because there are some people who like the more aggressive snowball-y kind of games, like whoever takes the map first just ends up winning it because they have more resources. However, and again, I know this is kind of a debate in the RTS community, but it really does discourage macro games in which you build a larger army and you're trying to spread out and split your armies correctly. And I know some people just refer to anything that even looks like that as a turtle game, and they want more aggression. I think that it exists on a spectrum, and I like that the creep camps encourage you to get out on the map and take map control. However, when you overtune how much those are worth, then the game just snowballs, and it's impossible to have a dynamic game because the whichever faction is the best at just seizing control of the game right at the beginning, usually Infernals, has a just a massive lead in the game. You saw a lot of build orders revolve around it actually as well, with taking the early creep camps as a part of your build order. I like that would be a part of it to tighten up your build order, but yeah, I don't necessarily like the idea that it would be your economy, because it kind of defeats the purpose of an RTS. If you're going to move out with 2 units, get some creeps, and try to kill your opponent's base, then maybe switch to a MOBA. Maybe that's more your thing. But yeah, I think if you're here for RTS, then getting diverse armies, making decisions, growing your base, and overwhelming your opponent, I think that's more thematic. So it's a little bit preferential. I'm a little bit on the fence. I hope they nerf creeps more, though. I think it was actually in a good spot before they changed it. I know some people were ignoring them a little bit, but I feel like the controlling the towers for the benefit is probably the way to go. So, liked where it was before. I think that maybe it needed a very minor tune-up. Glad to see it go down. Maybe even could see it go down more, though. Bug fix. That was the Hornet not doing full damage. I was wondering about this because in a couple of my games I found that the Hornet was not that effective against the Saber. Not the Saber, the Scythe. And I was very confused. So, glad to see that fixed. I am also glad that I haven't been seeing any Hornets in play, really. There was a patch where Hornet Harass was the big thing, and I think that especially fast-moving air units, but powerful air units, I think are a huge mistake at least in a standard RTS. I think that air units were much better balanced in Command and Conquer Red Alert 3, but that's the only game that I can think of in which air units were balanced in a fun way. Usually they're just really, really annoying, and while they're not strong enough to be a part of like your main army in some cases, it just speed and ferocity means that your bases can be harassed at almost no cost. It forces low-level games to have this turret turtle meta, and even high-level games to just sometimes end just because air units caught you out of position for like 3 seconds. So, happy to see the anti-air buffed. Hope that no air units are particularly good at obliterating ground units. I'm keeping an eye on the carrier. I'm wary of it. The helicarrier from the Vanguard. I think it's more okay if it has like an ability that allows it to be almost like a siege unit, but that it's bad itself in a straight up fight. That might be okay. But from what I've seen, it does okay in a straight up fight. And it's so tanky that once you drop your shield on it, you can almost survive forever. I don't know. I'm a little wary of it. I think this stealth bomber is also bugged on it. Don't quote me on that. I am not... I haven't done a whole lot of testing in that field, but there's been a couple of times where I feel like the enemy has had detection, and they weren't automatically shooting the bombers. So maybe some kind of bug where you have to specifically target them, or maybe it's like super stealthed right now where detection doesn't reveal it, or maybe certain detection is bugged. The point is, it's flown right by Shadow Flyers, and the Shadow Flyers don't seem to care about the stealth bombers, which seems weird, because if you didn't know this, the Shadow Flyers are detection. I think once you upgrade them, whether they're detection as a base or whether you have to upgrade them, I know they have detection. So theoretically, just having Shadow Flyers above your army should protect you from stealth bombers, but that is not what I've seen so far. So if that is bugged, if I'm correct about that, I hope they fix it. Okay, next up, we've got the Imp Flame on Ignition being decreased. So now they blow up just a little bit faster. I think that's probably fair. It's a pretty large investment. Yeah. As long as they keep their fuse where they'll blow up after a little while, whether it hits something or not, I think it's fine. I am wary of anything that's even similar to the Baneling, because the Baneling was so tricky to balance. Anytime it was edged towards balance in StarCraft 2, there was an uproar of the community. So I would love to see those kinds of units completely avoided, though, since they require a lot of skill to defend against, and they don't require a lot of skill to use. And this is not meant to be a debate on StarCraft 2 balance, but too many mechanics like that existed in StarCraft 2. And so I'm glad that they put that little restriction on Flame on Imps. The Infernals clearly need it in certain situations. So if you're struggling as Infernals, that might be what you need. But yeah, I'll be wary of that for sure, but it seems to be okay because of the fuse mechanic. The Gaunt. So the Gaunt was changed in a bunch of little ways. So the secondary damage became slightly less effective against light. However, the primary attack became slightly stronger against all targets. So, yeah, 2 extra damage to the base attack for a total of 8. And the versus light reduced by 1. So you'll see less of a difference versus light targets, since it's only 1 extra damage. But yeah, yeah, it's gotten a little bit effective against the primary, a little bit more effective against the primary target. It says weapon period increased from 1 to 1.3. I actually don't know what that means. So, I don't think that's attack speed, because I feel like that would be a different term. X and miasma are radius decreased. I'm not surprised by that. It seemed really strong. I didn't see anybody use it, but somebody clearly was, because it's getting reduced a little bit. It did hit a big area. It did indeed hit a big area. So, Magmadons no longer stun each other with the big tramples. Now, I'm a huge fan of this. I think it's very awkward when essentially they come together and they're just kind of sitting there stomping on each other. You can't run them away, you can't move them forward. It just feels right that they would be immune to it, and that you are essentially having a Magmadon showdown with each other, and your Micro and your Magmadons. I think that's going to be way more dynamic. Weaver structure damage decreased. This was because of a cheese in which you could warp your Weavers to a Shroud Stone that you built near your opponent, and so you just have Weavers pop up on their side of the map really quick and pop one of their bases. Although I've seen it go wrong just as much as I've seen it happen. So, was it necessary? Probably, but just funny to see after all the failed attempts I've seen. So overall, here's my thoughts. I think the Infernal changes are probably good. The one thing that I'm not sure about, like I said, I'm going to keep my eye on the Imp, but the one thing I'm not sure about is the Gaunt. So I think people underestimate the Gaunt a little bit, because the Exo just looks more powerful, and the way they scale with their ranking up makes them feel more impactful, but I don't know, pound for pound, the Gaunt might be as dangerous, if not worse, because they've got the Bounce, they've got the Infest. Their upgrades are quite potent. The Exos are really good at taking out heavy targets, but the Gaunts kind of feel like they're good at everything, and they just got a little bit better at everything. There's a few units that they're bad against, like the Magmadon and the Archangel, and I'll actually even throw the Vulcan into that mix. All units that are pretty effective versus the Gaunts. Otherwise, the Gaunts are just kind of an all-arounder, right? They're never going to be a bad choice in your army, and that makes me wonder if they are really that good. Because there are times when Exos is not what you need, particularly if your opponent is massing Gaunts. But mass Gaunts can handle almost anything. I don't know. I'd like to see the Brute be a little bit more useful. So that's my that's my thoughts. Is that I think the changes are fine, but I wonder if they're putting too much emphasis on the Gaunt, because we barely see Brutes made. They're just mixed in very occasionally. Arc ships don't cost anything. I think this is great. I see why it had a supply cost, considering that it actually provides power, but it provides diminishing power as you rank it up from an arc station to an arc fortress. The thing is that I don't see any reason to do that except once, right? It's fairly expensive, it takes a while, so I don't see why you would have more than one arc fortress, and frankly, I don't know that I've seen a maxed out Celestial army. Even late game, I don't know if that I've seen it. So I think that this is probably, for the most part, not going to be noticeable. I certainly haven't noticed it at all in any of my games. So yeah, good change, I guess, but probably won't see anything from it. maybe the pros will see a little bit more use out of it, but in my experience, the pros are far more interested in cheesing with Celestial. So, actually, is that even optimal? I don't know, guys. I'll have to share my thoughts with you on that later. Okay, collection array is getting a little bit more tanky. I think that's a fairly safe bet. The morph time also is decreased for when it changes to its flying mode. You can get them out a little bit faster. I think that this is maybe a good change. I don't know that it was entirely necessary, but I don't think it's going to ruin anything either. The fact that the Celestials have their infrastructure just splayed out across the map means that that's a hurdle that you have in exchange for their flexibility in building and just the raw speed at which they can expand. So I almost felt like that was a good middle ground where the danger is that your infrastructure is vulnerable, but I will say that that's true of a lot of Celestial infrastructure. I do think that in the future, though, other than the oddball cheese, we will start to see Celestial structure placement more meaningful. In fact, check out my video on the pro analysis that I did, in which building placement actually plays a big role. So I think we'll see a lot more of that in the future with Celestials, but for now, they're mostly being used for cheese, and until the cheesing stops, we won't see any optimization of the faction. Vector speed decreased. Recall upgrade now increases movement speed post upgrade. I think that this is good. They are definitely strong in the early game. I think that giving them more speed post buff, I think it's probably okay once the other person has the breathing room to tech up. So it should make for a little bit more dynamic of an early game. This will be particularly good because Vanguard will be able to counter vectors with dogs now more effectively. Dogs were already decent against the vectors, as we saw in some pro games, but the scout should get better at handling them. And I think that being able to shut down early game cheese is crucial for the development of meta in a RTS. And I know, again, some people like the mass aggression, and I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing that aggression exists in RTS. But for a game to stay interesting, some games need to go the distance, and you need to see more units pop out. Otherwise, the games become stale. You just see the same aggressive tactics, roll the dice early game. So there needs to be a certain amount of safety built into the game, and that includes making it safe for sapling players to play. Because when the game is explosive and volatile and relies purely on rolling the dice on aggressive strategies, the lower skill end of the community tends to struggle a lot more. So happy to see this nerfed, very happy to see this nerfed, but we'll see. I think that it's going to take a while for the meta to settle and for these changes to start being very specific and targeted. I think that the scythe being fixed so that it does better against heavy units, this is probably huge because the scythe is going to wreck the carrier now, I think. I haven't had a chance to test that one. I've never seen a Vanguard player build the carriers against me, the helicarriers. The decrease to damage versus ground, I don't know if that was necessary. I don't feel like they were that strong, and with the buff to Hornets, I think that they were even more manageable. But what I'm not sure about is how they were used in Celestial versus Infernal. I've never seen them used in Celestial versus Infernal, period. But I would suspect that they would be pretty bad against Gaunts, but maybe they weren't. The fact that they also reduced their damage versus Heavy makes me feel like it wasn't in response to the Gaunt. Maybe they were good at sniping Weavers or something like that. But I don't know. They don't attack very fast, and they do have that mechanic where the damage increases when you get closer. Maybe some people were better about using it, and it's much better than what the pros were showing, because the pros never kite forward. They always just let it attack at max range. So they're essentially doing half damage with the unit. So again, I don't know. I'm a little unsure about that one, even with the time to think about it. I'm not confident I know how that's going to shake out, but I suspect it was a balance for Infernals, not Vanguard, because Vanguard's heavy units don't tend to shoot up. And of course, it was a bug issue that was fixed that's causing it to do more damage versus air. So the Saber, love the changes here. The Saber does more damage to generic targets and a little bit less to heavy, so they're not so much of a sniper. They also have a area line damage, and that's been increased. So things that are in the way between you and the target take 50% of the damage. This makes it a brutal crowd buster now. Like I said, I like these changes. I think the Saber was the weakest of the siege units, but I need to do some more testing with the Saber. I wonder if it's going to be a little too effective now, especially with the buff it received last time, to where its speed ability doesn't require HP anymore, so you can use that more aggressively. The Archangel's avatar form was increased by a pretty wide margin, from 250 to 400. But it no longer targets units with the Meteor Strike, it just targets the ground. I like that it's a skill shot now. That's, I think, a good change. I do wonder if the 400 extra health was necessary. I do feel like Archangel was really strong. I wonder if it was being just underutilized, essentially. But yeah, I wasn't under the impression that it needed a change. So I do like the fact that it's a skill shot, though, now. You just land it on the ground. This actually is both quality of life change and nerf, because you could just target units and you would ensure that it wouldn't miss. But on the other hand, sometimes if they were retreating, then some of your units would latch onto that, and so sometimes you would get like an awkward, like, land already, land, and it's chasing that one unit that's going back. So glad to see that changed for better and for worse. I think it's a solid change. Yeah, so the some of the devs' thoughts on this I will go over very briefly. I don't want to spend much more time on this, though. So the dev said it's exactly the same thing I said, which is the changes were to avoid the creep snowballing. The matchups seem to still have the same problem as before, that even though the matchups are fairly well balanced, there is this dichotomy of Vanguard beats Infernal, Infernal beats Celestial, and Celestial beats Vanguard. So they're still trying to fix the skew. Very interesting that very little changes were made to Vanguard in this patch, considering that the skew is in all directions. In regards to Vanguard versus Infernal, they did bring up that they didn't think that the EXO was the problem with the infantry balls. but rather the Lancer. And I think that this is particularly true for the Infernal play. I think that the Exos are so good against Lancers themselves that in Vanguard versus Vanguard, it's less of a problem. You just need to make sure that you tech up to Exos fast enough after getting Scouts to make sure that you can target down Lancers and you've got a pretty well-rounded army. But yeah, the Lancers just shred Gaunts, and they're so tanky that in general, you have yeah, the Lancers are so tanky in and of themselves as a tier 1 unit that it's actually crazy. I actually am not a fan of the Lancer whatsoever. Lore-wise, I think they're weird. Why is this guy with a sword and, and some armor tankier than my tank? You know what I mean? Like, Lancers with their damage reduction, their unique damage reduction, are one of the most tankiest units in the game, and it's just a guy in a suit. I feel like if you're gonna make something that tanky, something that rivals the tankiness of Vulcans and Archangels, then it should be more like a mech or something like that. But they're also fast. Again, lore-wise and functionality-wise, I'm not a huge fan of the Lancer. I'd love to see a complete redesign of it, but I don't think we'll see that. So I'm happy to instead see them just nerfed a little bit. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know that we'll see that mostly, is what I'm saying. The Gaunt change was, in fact, to hit the Lancer, though. So they do a lot more damage to Lancers, and that was kind of the point. For Vanguard versus Celestial, we see the Vector nerf coming into play, and the Hornet fix means that Seraphs and Scythes will get hard countered by the Hornet. So we'll see a lot more Hornet versus Celestial, and I am okay with that. I've already mentioned that I like the Hornet as a anti-air unit. So those are my thoughts on the patch. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.